Welcome back, friends. In today's story, we are going to pick it up in the fall of 1972. Let me make a quick adjustment to the time machine, plug us in, and this is where our story will begin. Now, in our last story, the Wadsworth Mansion had broken up, and Steve Jablecki had moved to California to be with the producers. Charlie, John, and I still wanted something to do, so Charlie arranged a massive jam session in Taunton with a bunch of his friends to see who we gelled with. He invited Bobby Ledger. I think he played with Richie and the Renegades and was in the Daddy Warbucks for a little while in '72. He also invited Eddie Costa, who was a great piano player, and he could play really good flute. And the odd thing was, when I moved to California, maybe 2 years after I had been there, I was in the Kathy McDonald band, and we were going to be playing a big club in Laguna Beach. So my drummer Rob and I went down to scope it out. Eddie Costa was there playing keyboard in one of those bands. During the jam session in Taunton, Bobby Ledger sang a bunch of songs, and he really loved Chuck Berry. We did Nadine and Oh Carol, and that was right up his alley. Bobby was a fun guy. We had a great jam session. John Poole, the bassist, and Charlie Flannery and I wanted to keep playing. So Charlie found a guy named Little John who was looking for a band. Little John was a rhythm guitar player and a singer, and he was, to be very candid, kind of an ass. He said, "My name's Little John. I was a pimp in LA, you know, I was a big man, and I've come back here now to be a famous rock star, and you guys will be in my band." So we took that with a grain of salt. But he did have some gigs, and I would drive up from the Cape, crash on his floor with a sleeping bag, and we finally got out on the road. The first night we were playing at an army base of some sort, and he had a 100-watt Marshall stacked. It was just incredibly too loud. So while he was singing, I said, "Little John, you're too loud. Can you turn down a little bit?" He ignored me. Next song, in between the song, I asked him again. So finally, he was singing, and I turned his amp down a little bit. I had to. And he looked over at me and he said, "If you touch my amp again, I'll kill you." We were playing with kind of an unstable guy, we figured at this point, but we had to play out the tour dates. So we had a week up at a place called the Wobbly Barn. I think it was in Vermont. It was really cold. And John Poole's Chevy Impala, the fuel line froze up and the car wouldn't restart after we got there. So the club was pretty cool. It had a bunkhouse for all of the musicians, and it was run by a really nice lady, but she was rather large, not particularly attractive, but had a great personality. So we finished the first night, and we were all due to wake up and a prearranged time meet in the gallery, and the lady who ran the place and lived there and so forth was going to fix breakfast for us. So the band met in the kitchen area, and Little John came out with his rap and said, "Man, I guaranteed us a gig here for life. Yes, sir, I took care of that girl last night. We are set for the rest of forever if we want to keep playing here." And then he walked out of the room for a minute, and in walked the club owner. And she looked at the three of us and she said, "Talk about a lousy piece of ass I had last night." And we just broke up. We said, "Okay, so much for this." So we spent about 3 days in a garage with a blowtorch and all kind of heaters running, trying to get Johnny's car running. And we finally did. We played out the gigs and we went back to Boston. We said, all right, let's do this, just the three of us as a trio. So John Poole, Charlie Flannery, and I called ourselves Choker. Our time together in the Wadsworth Mansion and with Little John helped prepare Charlie and John and I quickly to be playing around Boston. We had obtained a booking agent named Melvin Scott, who booked us at Katy's and Bunratty's and a couple of other clubs. Katy's, Katy's, if we had the t-shirt. And we were opening up for Jeremy Spence and the Children of God. And if you recall from one of my other stories, Fleetwood Mac was playing at the Whiskey and they were in between shows, and Jeremy had walked across the street, ran into a bunch of Jehovah's Witnesses, and wasn't heard from for probably a week to 10 days, in which he announced he quit the band. So he was off touring with Jeremy and the Children. So we were opening for him, and Melvin, he showed up at the second set. We were doing 3 shows. And he said, hey guys, I got something new. You might want to try it, but wait till later to take it. And we said, well, what is it? And he said, it's called a Quaalude. Roarer 714. So he gave Charlie and I one. And we took it just before the final set. And we were in the middle of playing Oh Pretty Woman. Charlie hit the cymbal crash at the end, fell right over his drums. They fell off the riser. The cymbal hit my SG and cut a little notch into it. And we were just totally wasted out of our minds. We have one weekend where Charlie and I and John went to Aerosmith's Columbia Records signing party. They had scored a deal with Columbia, and it was in Bunratty's. And I recall looking at them playing, and they sounded great, and saying, wow, they are the new American Rolling Stones. This will be a really, really great band. It was just a fabulous showcase and a great time. But we had rented a house. Charlie rented the house, actually, on Nantasket Beach in Hull. And he and Kathy, his wife, and their daughter now, Nico, and they had gotten married, lived upstairs. And there was a guest room downstairs and a practice area, and then a little hangout and apartment stuff. So John would come up. Sometimes he'd bring his girlfriend, Sandy, who he later married. Playing in a trio is not without its challenges. We had to be very careful with the material that we selected so we could pull it off as a 3-piece. Charlie and I got an invitation to go up to Sib Hasian's house on the North Shore for an LSD party. Sib was the drummer for Boston. So you knew it was going to be a good time and a wild time. And I mean, when we got there, he was like, man, thanks for coming. Take some doses. And everybody was tripping out. It was big in those days. So finally, after a couple of hours of music and fun, Charlie and Kathy and I went across the street to the beach, and they decided they were going to go swimming. They threw their clothes off and dove into the ocean. And I said, I think I'll probably drive back to Cape Cod because I'm still ripped and got a long way to go before sleep. So I drove on off, but it was pretty cool partying at Sib's house. Great guy, great drummer, great band, Boston. Now, my girlfriend Jane had to have an operation at the Mayo Clinic. So she flew off to the clinic, and I kept up the house in Provincetown and stayed at Charlie's when we were practicing in Nantasket Beach. But I was able to book us at the Governor Bradford Inn several times, and we always had a good time playing there, and there was plenty of room at the house that I was renting. So one night, out of the blue, walked in a girl named Sheila with a guy, and Sheila was Steve Blodgett, our old rhythm guitar player's girlfriend, when he was at UConn in Connecticut, and we did all those wild jobs. So all of us were really, she was a beautiful girl, so we all kind of dug her. And we were in my living room after the show, and we're getting high. And Sheila said, "Where's the bathroom?" And I showed her and came back, and we're partying on. And then after about 5 minutes, Charlie said, "Oh, I got to get a fresh up my drink in the kitchen." I said, "Okay." So about 15 minutes went by, and I knew Charlie was not freshening up his drink in the kitchen, and I started hearing some noises and stuff. And Sheila's boyfriend said, "Boy, they've been gone a long time. Do you think they're okay?" I said, "You wait right here. Let me just go check it out." Walked through the kitchen, over to the bathroom, opened the door. It was a tiny little bathroom, and there on the floor was Charlie and Sheila, and they were going at it. And I said, "You guys need to break this up. Sheila's boyfriend is getting a little anxious. So please, get me off the hook here." So I went back and said, "Oh yeah, everything's okay, just a little problem with the plumbing." So Charlie came out a minute later, and Sheila came out. Everything was cool. Well, our booking agent, Melvin Scott, had booked us at Bunratty's and Katy's for, I don't know, 3-4 days at a shot. And while we were playing at Katy's one night, a beautiful woman named Barbara Houston, who was a student at Boston University, came in. We hit it off immediately, and I went to her place after the show. We had put on a really good performance that night. The band was hitting on all cylinders, and so it was party time. We had a great time, and I neglected even to get her phone number because I just thought the party would never end, and tomorrow is a new day, so today is over. Well, there was another local band called the Daddy Warbucks. They had a great reputation around Boston and the North Shore. Their keyboard player was a guy named Wiley Crawford, who was a genius from Brockton, Mass. Wiley could sing like Stevie Winwood, play the organ like him, and he could play great rhythm guitar too. I mean, everybody wanted him in their band, including Aerosmith, who made Wiley an offer to join their band more than once. We'd occasionally go over to their place and party. They had some wild parties. But the Daddy Warbucks had rented a house just a couple of blocks from us on Nantasket Beach. So there were many nights the bands would get together. We had one of those little table hockey things, and the Boston Bruins were really big, and we knew the names of all the players. John Poole was really into it, and he wrote the name of the goalie, and Derek Sanderson and Bobby Orr and Jerry Cheevers and all these guys. So we'd be in these tournaments with the Daddy Warbucks, and then we'd have a big jam session. And call it a night. So we worked on luring Wiley into our band. The Daddy Warbucks found a guy named Ralph Morman, a vocalist. He sounded like Rod Stewart, only he was probably better. And Ralph, he was a great guy, really good looking guy. And we went and saw them up on the North Shore at some club opening for Sam and Dave. I do remember Ralph Morman singing Maybe I'm Amazed that night, though, and he sang it fabulously. Well, Sam and Dave's horn player, a guy named Sparky, decided to leave the Sam and Dave tour and hang out with the Daddy Warbucks. And so he crashed between their place and our place for a little while. And Wiley was getting a little tired of the Warbucks, so he eventually agreed to join our band. Well, we finally got Wiley in our band, and the Warbucks were fine with Ralph being the singer, and so we started rehearsing with Wiley and hanging out. He was a crazy guy. In fact, one time, going down Beacon Street, and we stopped at a light, and oddly enough, it was the light in the intersection where a couple of years before I had met the girl with the fringe jacket that belonged to Eric Clapton. And there was a noise we were hearing from the transmission, but the car was working. Wiley said, "Oh, this has happened to me before. I know exactly what to do." I said, what? He said, "Put your foot on the brake, put it into park, rev it up as fast as you can, and throw it into gear, and that'll snap it out of it." So I did exactly that, and the whole rear axle like fell off and started bumping up through the floorboards. Everybody jumped out of the car. I said, "Man, this car is toast." I said, "Thanks for the tip, Wiley." Well, I got my toolbox out of the trunk, took the license plates off the car, and we all walked to the subway line and took a train back to Hull. We practiced, we wrote a couple of songs, and we were playing up on the North Shore at a really great club. My sister Kathy and brother Steve were in the audience, and Steve made a cassette tape of that. When I drove down to Louisville to pick Jane up, I stayed for a couple of days at her mom and her mom's husband's apartment. Jim Hicks, he was the conductor for the Louisville Symphony, and he took us to Churchill Downs, actually, for the races one afternoon, gave me $20 to bet. I didn't win anything, but it was exciting, and I certainly didn't have any money to be betting, let alone getting into Churchill Downs. So I have been. And Jane's cousin, who she called Boo, his last name was Egan, and her father, Frank Egan, played guitar in the Paul Whiteman Orchestra during the swing era. Now, I was a monster Benny Goodman fan, Chick Webb, Artie Shaw, all of the big bands really turned me on. Paul Whiteman Band was the first band that sort of wrote it all down and showed that it could be arranged and presented for high society folks. So while I was there, Frank said, "Hey, can I borrow your guitar?" All of the older people were drinking and partying, and man, he played some songs. I was really impressed, because to play in a big band, I mean, you're everywhere. And he was playing and singing. Everyone was having a great time. Just before I went to pick Jane up, we had played this great gig. And after the show, John and Wiley went on a bender. They took a bunch of speed, stayed up all night, went to bars, were drinking all into the next day. And finally, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, John said to Wiley, "Wiley, you know, I think there's only room for one lead singer in this band. And I think you should go." And so Wiley said, "Okay, screw you, I'm out of here." Well, I got back from playing this great gig, picked Jane up, went to Charlie's, and said, "All right, what's next?" And I walked into the practice room and I noticed John Poole's amplifier had all these holes in it. When Charlie found out that John had fired Wiley, he took a rifle to John's amplifier. So, back to square one, right? Summer's rolling around, and Jimmy Newland, who was the guitar player for the Daddy Warbucks, and I were pretty good friends, and so was Wiley and Ralph Morman. Ralph came down to the Cape. I ran into him on the street, and he stayed over a night or two at my pad, and we worked on a couple of songs together. Jimmy and Ralph and Wiley had met a couple of guys from Baltimore named Punky Meadows and Mickey Jones. And they later formed the band Angel and were a big hair band in the 70s. So they were sort of being backed by a motorcycle gang that was dealing speed and paying for a rehearsal place for them. And I hung out for about a week thinking maybe I might be able to get in this new forming band. Wiley decided he didn't want anything to do with it, and it was clear that a third guitar spot was not going to open up. So I went back to the Cape. I knew I needed to be back in the city. And so I spoke with my sister Marcy, and we decided that we would rent an apartment together. And we looked at a few spots, and we finally decided on a place. We put a down payment on it, and we're supposed to move in September 1st or September 7th, something like that. I went back down to Provincetown, talked it over with Jane, and she was cool with it, understanding I needed to get back into a good band and just, come back and everything will be fine. A few days later, Steve Jablecki called me from LA, and he said, "I've got the house. The producer said we're ready. All we've got to do is put the band together. So I want you to come out to LA. I'll send you a plane ticket. You can stay at my house on Agnes Avenue in the San Fernando Valley, and we'll put a band together. We'll make a record. We'll go on tour, and everything will be great again." I said, "That sounds good to me, so send me the ticket." Well, I felt bad that I had to renege on my deal with Marcy, but I knew I had to go to California. Unfortunately, Bobby Ledger, Charlie Flannery, John Poole, Steve Jablecki, all of the Daddy Warbucks, except for Tommy Bonarrigo, the drummer, have passed on. Now, when we go up north and play the New England area, I always call Tommy to drum for us because he's a great drummer, and it's a good remembrance of days gone by. When Steve sent me the ticket, I said, it's time for the West Coast adventure to begin. And that is the story of 1972 to 1973. I am just getting started with these stories, and already I have been through so much. It's a miracle that I am still here. And I thank God for that, because I must be doing something right. Otherwise, I would have been a goner, like all my other friends. So thank you for listening and letting me tell this story. It's got to be a reason for it. And that's you, so you can listen and hear what things were like back in the day, the good old days of rock and roll. Keep love in your heart, a song in your head. And if you like the video, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe, hit the bell so you know when the next cool story is coming. So thanks for hanging out with the old-time rock and roller. I'll see you down the story highway.